But I'll tell you something. Growing up, my parents, Sunday mornings, their room door would remain locked till 10 in the morning. And my sister and I would do what we needed to do. We'd be playing Barbie, Legos, whatever. 10 o'clock, we'd hear the door unlock and we'd pile into their bedroom and we'd listen to music and whatever. The day had begun, the family part of the day had begun. But that time for them, now in retrospect, I mean, talk about signaling to the whole world, including to your partner, that one-on-one time is important.
You are here for a reason, but navigating this human life can be challenging. How do you care for your body, mind, and spirit to make the most of your time here on Earth? How can you harness your incredible human potential? In this podcast, we explore these questions and more to help you craft your best life yet. Welcome to I Am Human. Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to another episode of I Am Human. I'm Dr. Yami, and I am your host, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you today. And today we're going to cover a topic I've never covered on the podcast before, so I hope that you enjoy this. I want to remind you, if you have not already, to please subscribe to the podcast. And if you have enjoyed these episodes, please share it with someone that you care about if you feel like it can help them as well. I appreciate you so much for being a listener. And I welcome you as a new listener. And thank you so much to all my veteran listeners out there. I appreciate you so much. To be human means to be conditioned by society and religion and carry shame about who we are. But to be human also means to break free from our conditioning and these artificial constructs that hold us to certain belief systems and to live the life that we truly desire. Our guest today is Kaamna Bhojwani. She is a sexuality researcher with a specialization in shame and spirituality. Through one-on-one clients, small group workshops, and public events, Kaamna helps people shed the shame and guilt around their sexuality and embrace a new sexual self-identity. Kaamna holds a master's degree in spiritual psychology from Columbia University, where she studied sexual shame. She also has a master's in organizational psychology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and a bachelor's in clinical psychology from Smith College. Kaamna's work combines academic rigor with a deep love and compassion for being human with all its complexities. And in this episode, we talk about spirituality and sexuality. We define both of those terms, how they may be interrelated, why sexuality has become taboo, the definition of shame and where it originates from in sexuality, and what the benefits are of uncovering and understanding our sexual shame and reconditioning ourselves from it. We also talk about how often women fake orgasms and why the definition of good sex and how media might change our expectations and how sexuality can change over the course of a lifetime and our long-term relationships, and what we can do to create deeper connections and greater fulfillment with our romantic partners. It's a really great episode, and I think obviously it's just barely scratching the surface on this really complex topic, but I think it's a conversation worth having. We also talk about how you may approach the conversations around sexuality with your children, which I think is very uncomfortable for many people, very difficult for many people. In fact, as a pediatrician, I often have parents that bring me their kids and say, please start this conversation with them because they don't even know where to start. So I suggest that you start thinking about it, gather resources to help you navigate these conversations because they are very important, not only in helping our children with their self-identity, but helping them with their safety and keeping them safe. So I hope that you enjoy this episode. I know it covers some uncomfortable topics, but I think that they're very important topics. Thank you so much for being here with me today. And now let's welcome Kaamna Bhojwani. The information on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not meant to replace careful evaluation and treatment. If you have concerns about your health or well being, please consult a healthcare professional. This podcast episode contains sensitive topics that may be triggering to certain people. Listener discretion is advised. Kaamna Bhojwani, welcome to I Am Human. It's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Yami.
So, this is definitely the first time I will be touching this topic on my podcast. So, this is a little bit new and new in a lot of different ways because I've never really thought about sexuality and spirituality being interrelated. So, maybe we can start there. How are these two topics, how can they even come together?
Well, let me flip that around and tell you why we think that they don't come together. That's because we equate spirituality with religion. And for many of us, our religions, and this is across the board, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, all the major religions of the world have very prescriptive and restrictive norms and ideas around sexuality. So when we think about an open sexuality that is linked to a spiritual energy and a spiritual well-being, to many people that's dissonant. That doesn't actually work. Now, how they do come together is, in my view, nothing about the human experience, and I say this a lot, nothing about the human experience is profane. And to me, that is the core of spirituality, that there is no othering, even if it is a part of ourselves. And there's no denying that sexuality is a very big part of ourselves, right? It's something most people think about all day long, actually. Yet we've been told that it's bad or it's shameful or it's, a part of us that needs to be in the bedroom, doors closed, lights off at night with a partner. And unfortunately, sexual energy is extremely powerful and it doesn't want to obey those rules.
Well, I almost feel like it causes the opposite reaction, right? Like if you're told something is bad, that's when you obsess about it. Same thing happens with food, which is one of the things I try to teach with intuitive eating is the more we restrict, the more the more we have trouble with food and wanting a lot of it. So maybe let's step back a little bit. And what is your definition of spirituality?
Oof. Spirituality for me is the experience of something other than yourself. And spirituality is very individual. Again, which is where we distinguish it from religion a little bit. It's not prescriptive. You could be, your divine could be the ocean, like mine is. Or it could be in other people, it could be in service. So it really is your individual and your intuitive relationship with something outside of yourself. That's how I see it.
Interesting that you said it just like that because right before you said outside of yourself, I felt, well, but we have the inner knowing of what it is.
Indeed.
So kind of it's inside of all of us too, right?
Indeed. It is very much inside. So it is an internal experience of that external connection in a sense. And yes, I mean, when I say nothing in the human experience is profane, I mean that divinity that we're looking for outside is within us. But there is no separation, right? That's what they call illusion, Maya, right? The idea that the animals are different from us or other people are different from us. And that is a fundamental tenet of spirituality, that there is no separation, there is unification. And that is something that religion actually, you know, thrives on. Virtue and vice, flesh and spirit, this sort of separation, God and devil. And the reality is, from a spiritual standpoint, that those separations don't really exist.
Yeah, it's very difficult to unlearn that though, especially when it started when we were very young.
Yeah.
So maybe we should talk a little bit about why sexuality has become so taboo, which you kind of started, maybe religion has something to do with it, but what else has affected our feelings and our thoughts about sexuality?
So I study sexual shame because when I went to Columbia University very recently in a spiritual psychology program. Columbia is one of the few places in the world that would even dare to put something like spiritual psychology in their official psychology curriculum. And I very quickly realized that I wanted to study sexuality. And very quickly, I realized that I could not study sexuality without understanding sexual shame, because it seemed to be the elephant in the room that was standing between our self-expression, our self-acceptance, and all of that. So My sense is that because sexual energy is so powerful, it has been regulated for centuries. And there, look, if you go back into our history, there are theories that initially, when we were closer to the earth and a more sort of feminine divinity reign, we were closer to our sexuality. We were more instinctual. We were more about nature and fertility and fecundity and all these things that are more feminine traits. But then as we moved into protecting and more warring type of communities, then it became the phallocracy. It became more masculine. And to be honest, I'm still sifting through and figuring out how much of that I believe, because I don't believe, again, that duality. I don't think it's a feminine masculine thing. I think those energies have to be interwoven. But we do know this idea that sexuality has to be in a particular box. It is taught to us from a very young age, consciously, unconsciously, verbally, non-verbally. We know that parents are involved. We know that extended family is involved. We know that schools are involved. We know that religious organizations, partners. A lot of people report being shamed by their own lovers and spouses and that sort of thing. And even corporations. So every major institution that you touch in your life in this modern day has some idea of what your sexuality should look like. And it's no wonder that we're all feeling repressed and judged everywhere that we turn.
What got you interested in this topic? Seems like, you started with the spiritual psychology and ended up in sexuality. Was that a difficult decision for you to make? Because do you feel like, have you been stigmatized by friends and family or anything like that?
So, yes and no, my background's a little interesting. I grew up in India. But I grew up in, contrary to what people think, I had a very open upbringing. Not that my parents were sitting around and, flashing different condoms at me or anything like that, but it was a very natural and a very non-stigmatized environment for my sister and I. And this is, this is in my book. My dad, when we were teenagers, he said to us, "Bring the boys home." And that was very powerful, simply because in a world where people are really concerned about showing off their children's, particularly their girls' virginity to the neighbors, for him, our safety was primary. He didn't want us running around in cars with boys on the streets. He would much rather, under the safety of our home, we experimented and we did whatever we needed to do, which was a very natural part of being teenage girls, of growing up and experimenting. I don't think he thought forward to how progressive that was and what a gift that was, or any of those implications that followed me through. So I think I had that as a grounding. And then, believe it or not, when I came to the US to go to college, and then grad school and ended up staying on, I understood very quickly that, of course, in India, don't get me wrong, India has a very complicated relationship with sexuality as well. My experience was an anomaly, but across the world, and I've lived in the US, I've lived in the UK, I've lived in Australia. Across the world, I see this discrepancy and I see this struggle. Women saying, "I want to be more." Men saying, "I don't want to be the aggressor. I'm not masculine enough. I'm not virgin enough," you name it. It's across the board. So I didn't study it formally until I think 2018, when I launched my first Kaamna Live episode. And I have multiple degrees in psychology. So the idea was to stay within the realm of psychology, but to get to taboo topics. So my first video was 40 minutes on the female orgasm, right? Just going right for it. Um, and I talked about mental health and I talked about a bunch of different things, but obviously the videos about sexuality, infidelity, um, libido, menopause, andropause, all those things started becoming more and more popular. So I realized that I really needed to go for it in a more formal capacity and in a larger capacity. And now that's exclusively what I do.
Nice. What a journey, right? I mean, you
Right.
never know where life is going to take you. So I guess this is kind of, you've already answered this as far as shame, but maybe give us your definition of shame. And if you have any other thoughts on where shame originates from in sexuality.
So I think before we do that, we have to define what sexuality means. right? Because a lot of people think sexuality and sex are the same thing, and they're not. Sex is one component. I think of it as the pizza pie, right? Sex is one slice, but sexuality is your sexual orientation. It's your relationship with your body, it's desire, it's consent, it's sexual justice, it's your value systems, your beliefs. All of those things comprise your sexuality. Now, imagine what a big part that plays in your life, even if you're at work, right? It's how you carry yourself, how you feel in your body, your energy, all of that stuff. So sexual shame, as I study it, is negative assessments or beliefs around any of those aspects. So you can imagine why it is so ubiquitous. And the way the researchers talk about shame, and Brené Brown, of course, being one of the preeminent researchers of our time around shame, is they distinguish shame from guilt. So guilt is about, I have done something wrong. And they say that guilt can be adaptive. It sort of helps you recalibrate and change your behaviors to do something that's more integrated with your community, society, etc. Shame, on the other hand, is about being bad. It's an internal value judgment, which is very difficult to emerge from. Because when you think, especially as a child, when you think, gosh, I'm innately bad because my mom caught me playing with my genitals, which is very common because children are very curious. That stuff stays unless you consciously try and reverse it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm broken. And
Yeah,
it feels permanent, right? It feels like it won't change. So unless you work on it purposely and deliberately, you probably will believe it for the rest of your life, even
indeed.
if it's subconsciously. Well, thank
Yeah.
you for defining that. So, what are the benefits of uncovering and understanding our sexual shame and learning how to recondition ourselves from it?
Well, let's talk about the consequences, right? So we know from the research that in women, it shows up as self esteem issues, it shows up as low body confidence, it's linked to depression and anxiety. In men, men tend to shut down when they're feeling vulnerable. So it's linked to isolation and depression. It can lead to physiological issues around sexuality. So erectile dysfunction, lack of lubrication, obviously relationship issues, because you're feeling less vulnerable, you're feeling like you can't come into a safe place. So the implications are massive. Also, we find that shame is one of the primary reasons that people who have suffered sexual abuse don't come forward. And I'm going to give you one more that really scares me. When we study sexual shame in men, particularly when it's linked to their body, whether they're feeling like they're a little chubbier than they should be, dad bods, whatever you want to call it, penis size, hair, any of those things, it is linked to more hostility and violence towards women. So I'm
Wow.
not saying that this is a female only issue, far from it. In fact, I study and I work with a lot of men. But think about the implications across the board. If we're feeling shamed and we're feeling like we can't stand in our own skin and that the innate part of us is bad, none of us are feeling very good and we're not treating each other very well. So now if you think of it that way, why we need to work at it? Well, it's all those reasons. The problem is people are still quite hesitant to talk about shame. As you said, you've had 300 plus episodes of this podcast, and this is one of the first times you're touching it. That's not an uncommon experience for people in my field. But I promise you that it is worthwhile work, and it has to be conscious work. This is not something you'll just stumble into, right? It is something like, there's a part of me that feels bad about wanting, as a woman, wanting as much sex as I do, or wanting deeper intimacy with my partner, a different kind of intimacy, or having a kink, or any of those things. How do we investigate the root and how do we eliminate the shame?
So it sounds like pretty much everybody is going to be affected by this in one way or the other. Either you have it or your partner does. So, like you said, it's ubiquitous. So, what are the signs? Like you said, you're feeling uncomfortable, you're feeling bad about things. What are some other signs that people may experience when this is affecting them in their lives?
I think people at major transition points in their lives, they have a coming, pardon my French, they have a coming to Jesus moment around it, where it's just kind of like, I've been in an 18-year marriage and this part of me has been unfulfilled and I'm going to go discover it. Or you lose a job, or you lose a parent, because often those voices and those value systems are in what we've internalized from the authority figures around us, right? And it's just, even if it's something as simple as coming out, right, for our LGBTQ plus folks. So when you have these major transition points, then where do you go? Right. So this is where Brene Brown, she advocates, we're all on the same page in that talking about the shame alleviates it. But that's easier said than done. You're going to call your sister that you haven't like talked, you haven't broached this topic in 20 years and suddenly be like, hey, I have erectile dysfunction. Let's get into it. Likely not. But certainly finding communities, finding safe places in which you can speak. And for me, with the spirituality piece, it is really coming back to yourself. It is understanding. So I often tell people, write down your sexual scripts. What are the things you believe, you think you believe about sex? So it could be, women don't initiate sex. Having too many partners is bad, or whatever it is. People should not be sexually active until marriage. Whatever it is you believe, and then go down that list and figure out whose voice is that. Sometimes it's mom, sometimes it's dad, sometimes it's a sex education teacher, sex education. And I use the word loosely because many, like 99% of the world is not getting sex education. I got sex education from a nun who told me masturbation was a sin when I was 15. So that would go on my list, although that's one I've dispelled a while ago. So when you figure out whose voices they are, then you get to ask yourself as an adult living in 2024 in your society, community, wherever you are, which ones you believe, which ones you want to keep. And that is sort of the beginning. It's not an overwhelming practice, to be honest. Because the first step is just acknowledgement. What do I believe about this? Why does it grate me when my 16-year-old daughter, is wearing a short skirt and going to a school dance? Like what's the worry? What's the value system that's playing out in my ear? And by the way, we're finding that more parents are willing to have the talk with their kids, but they don't follow up with anything substantial. So they'll tell their kids, don't get knocked up and, use condoms, but they don't take them to buy the condoms, or they don't, they don't. So we're still half-assing it at some point.
Wow, that's such a good point. I want to go back to what you said earlier. And now I can kind of see how the spirituality really does play into this. You're talking about you're getting to these life transitions, and it's almost like your soul is telling you you're not living up to who you really are. There's something in you that's buried, or something that you're suppressing, or some other person that you're trying to be that wants to come out. And so you need to discover why that is. What are these beliefs that are blocking it? And I think it's so interesting how we have all these artificial constructs that we've created, right? I mean, like, depending on what culture, it can be different. Depending on what generation, it can be completely different. And I, like you, I was raised Catholic. So definitely was scarred by the masturbation thing. I'm just going to say it, okay?
Yeah.
Like completely scarred. And my children, I have two sons, 14 and 19, also they were raised in Catholic school, which is even, I didn't go to Catholic school. I was just, Latin American Catholic, which is, it's pretty intense. So I'm a pediatrician. So I was assigned the task of talking to them to have the sex talk. Okay. Which is interesting because you always think, like, I think I assumed like the man is going to want to do it, especially for two sons. But my husband's like, no, you do it. It was like, fine, I'll do it. I don't care. And so I literally had that talk with them. Like, you are going to be told in school that masturbation is bad. This is just part of the dogma of the Catholic Church. You can choose to believe it or not, but this is how human nature is. And, just trying to protect them from that trauma of like, these normal feelings and hormones is bad. I'm bad. There's something wrong with me. I'm sinful. I'm evil. So, I mean, I think that can be so traumatic, and it can last for decades. It could last your entire life. And so you've suppressed that. You've become somebody you're not really. And then you come to a time in your life where something happens and you're like, I want to live. I want to be myself. I want to be my full potential. where do I go next? So I think that those are some really good tips of like, okay, what is it really that I believe? And why do some things bother me? Why do some things make me uncomfortable? It's probably because of those conditioned beliefs that we have internally.
Well, look, I applaud you for having that conversation and for putting it the way that you did. There's tons of research around how to have the talk. And by the way, it's not just one talk. The way to do it is to
Right.
just have it be a series of conversations and openness. And parents don't have to have all the answers. God, I mean, today in the world, I don't know what's going on. I need my kids to educate me. Like, what does it mean? Like, what is, what is non-binary for a 15-year-old actually look like you, I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they're figuring stuff out, and I'm just sort of with them on the journey. But the message that I think is worth reinforcing is exactly what you said, is that this is very natural, and we learn along the way. I mean, there's a cultural sexologist in San Francisco who says simply just answer questions. You don't have to come in with a big speech. Answer questions, and if you don't know the answer, promise you'll figure it out for them, and come back with something. It's literally that simple. But parents who are anxious and avoidant make children who are anxious and avoidant. We know that. The research shows this.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I think I took the perspective of pediatrician because I'm all about safety, right? So I'm just
Sure.
like, okay, this is what's going to happen to your body. This is how you're going to feel. That's normal.
Yeah.
That's natural. It's part of being human. These are the consequences of doing certain things, and just being, it's not bad, but you just have to decide, is that the road you want to go down? Like, you got to protect yourself from STIs.
Yep.
You don't necessarily want to be a dad at 15.
Right.
So, just
Yeah.
knowing that these urges are natural doesn't make you bad, but at the same time, knowing the reality of the
Yes.
situation of engaging in some of these
Yeah.
acts, I think that's the talk that I had with them. And of course, yes, it's several things.
Yeah.
But also kids and people have different personalities. So my oldest one, he's so open with us. I mean,
Right.
sometimes I feel like he's too open, but he like tells us everything. And then my youngest one is like a vault.
Yeah.
There's
Take it,
nothing
mama.
coming
It's a
out of that
gift.
guy.
It's a gift to have a boy that's open is a gift. It is. Look, so I think what we say in the field is that you have to balance out the narrative where the prevention of pregnancy, the prevention of STIs. Yes, that's very important. We want children to be understanding safe sex, the implications, all of that stuff. But we also have to balance that with the conversation around pleasure and consent, particularly for girls,
Yes.
because girls don't get that. They don't get to hear that sex is supposed to feel good for you, and that you have a right to say no, and you have a right. Kids, there is actually no uniform definition for what sex is. So, in the absence of that conversation, how do you define sex? If somebody else tells you, oh, it's only oral sex, it's not really sex, you might be inclined to follow that if you have not already had that conversation or had that thought process, right? There are kids, by the way, there are girls that are having anal sex to preserve their virginity, right? Welcome to every religion's nonsensical idea that you are immoral or somehow unworthy if you are not a virgin.
Yeah.
But they're
Yeah.
having anal sex.
Those are all such good points and so many things to understand. And also knowing that as a parent, you just do the best you can and
Oh,
know you're not going to be perfect.
absolutely.
But I think that it is important to have these conversations and for your kids to feel safe having those conversations with you and expressing their thoughts and their doubts with you because you can be a safe place for them as well. So
I mean, if I could add a point of urgency for parents, I think what you have to do is like we talked about, reevaluate your value system, your belief system for your kids. Try and withhold the judgment, because here's something that doesn't exist in our when we were growing up. You'd pull out the stack of Playboy from under your dad's, all of that kind of stuff. The internet has changed everything. The kind of information that children have access to today, if they don't have a safe and open place to ask questions and to dissect what they're seeing, pornography will remain the default sex education. And I don't know about you, but I'm willing to make myself uncomfortable so that my son doesn't learn that, a woman choking on his penis is a sexy act. And I'm sorry to be so graphic about it, but that's kind of where we are.
That's so true. And it's part of one question that I'm going to ask you. But I mean, that is so true that right now we don't even understand what our children have access to out there. Like it's just so different than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was a teenager growing up. So I think you're right. It's really important that we be an open, safe place for that. But before we get to that, I want to talk about women and faking orgasm. So, how commonly do women fake orgasms? Is there stats on this? And why does this happen?
So I look in our world, it's very hard to have stats on any reliable stats on anything. You can assume that everything you see is underreported, right? So everything from the sexless marriages stats to the fidelity stats, nobody's going to tell you how they're cheated, all of that stuff. So yes, I think women fake orgasms much more than is reported. And I actually read a study about this recently. Very often, women fake orgasms to not hurt their partner's feelings, which on one hand is very sweet, but on the other hand, you're reinforcing the same behaviors that's not getting you off anyway. So, are we really moving forward with this? And there are other things around um, wanting, time, just kind of wanting to get it over with and not feeling like there's something wrong with you. There are a lot of there are a lot of men that don't know much about the female genitalia and what, the clitoris, all the, all that basic stuff. But then there are a lot of women that are ashamed to even communicate what their needs are. So I put the onus on all of us when it comes to why this happens, why it needs to stop. And I know it's easier said than done, but baby steps. But if women are not willing to know their bodies and own their pleasure, it's impossible for you to communicate that with any sort of authenticity and confidence.
It's funny because I've read about this, but I'm not that woman. Okay, I guess
Good
I'm
for
just a
you.
very selfish person. So,
Good for you. Good
and
for
I
you.
don't, and I'm not trying to preserve anybody's feelings, but uh, it's interesting though. I think it's interesting. I could definitely see the time thing for sure. Like
Yeah,
if you're just pressed for time, you're just like, all right, let's go. I got to go do the laundry or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That would make more sense to me.
And that's a lot of people. But keep in mind this idea that, which is very common in women, is that the sex is primarily for his pleasure. So sex occurs when he's come. That's when sex has happened. That's problematic. That's why we're so willing to
Yes.
give it up, right? And listen, I for what I do, I've faked orgasms in my 20s and my 30s. Will I be doing it again? No, thank you.
Enough of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because I do believe that if I'm in a sexual relationship that is based on mutual pleasure, why would I have him think that that's what worked? I'm
Yeah.
more likely to communicate and use my hands and use my mouth and maybe even yell if I have to. You missed it again. Whatever whatever it is. So we're gonna get it.
Okay. Well, that brings me to the definition of good sex because that's one of the things that we talk about. Like, we want to have good sex. Well, what is good sex? What is the definition of good sex? And then this is where I'm wondering, how has media affected our perceptions? Right? Like, not just pornography, which is like way like
Right.
whole other side of the spectrum, right? Of what
Sure.
maybe good sex might look like. But even just movies and, books and things like that, like our expectations, are they realistic? What is the definition of having good sex?
Okay, look, let me just put this out there as a caveat. I don't love putting these things again, like these are the rules, this is what good sex is, because it is so personal and it is so subjective. So if you and your partner think you're having good sex, you think you're having good sex on your own and it's good sex, simply said. Now, what do we when we study this, what does the research show? The research shows, surprisingly, that it's not really about orgasm. It's about two things. It's about how the experience makes you feel about yourself and how connected you feel with your partner, right? And that makes sense, right? That seems kind of intuitive. Couples that maintain that spark over a longer period, because that's a big, that's something the media tells us, it's all going to fade away and stuff like that. They have more communication, they have more sex more often. So they sort of keep the muscle going. They have oral sex, They're more willing to be adventurous and to try different things. And when I say communication, it's not just, in bed being like, honey, I like that, I didn't like that. They're doing it all day long. They're sexting, they're texting, they're flirting with each other. And that's sort of what keeps it going. But as much as I love a good orgasm as much as anybody else, but I would agree with the idea that the pleasure and the intimacy components are more important than those quick spikes.
Because really, at the end of the day, it really is about connection. It's just another form of connecting. And, the orgasms are definitely pleasurable, but really it's about connecting with somebody that you care about or somebody that you're attracted to.
Sure.
So, yeah, that's really interesting. I've been married for 23 years with my husband since we were
Congratulations.
18. So we've been together, we've grown up together.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious about how does sexuality change, not only just over a lifetime, because earlier in the interview you brought up, changes in our hormones as women. Like I'm in perimenopause, I'm headed towards menopause, things change. But even just over the course of a relationship, what are the expectations there? How can that change over time?
So one of the biggest issues is that we assume that it's not going to change. The biggest casualties of this is new parents, right? We never talk about what happens when that first baby is dropped into your perfect relationship and the shit hits the fan, literally, proverbially, all around. So I think the first thing you need to do is that you need to accept that it is going to change, and that there are a lot of positive benefits for keeping sex around in your relationships. It's a stress buster. It helps you connect with your partner, all of that kind of stuff. If you remove the sexual shame component, then as we get into our 40s and 50s, these hormonal pieces and the fact that our bodies are changing and, life's priorities get a little bit tricky. Right? Most people I know in their 30s and 40s are holding down two jobs. They're raising kids. They've got mortgages. The dog needs to be walked, all that kind of stuff. It's hard. It's hard. And there's no bigger buzzkill than stress for a libido. So we sort of have to acknowledge all of that and not pretend that it's not going to happen. The other problem that I see is the healthcare system. This shame that we're talking about is in the healthcare system as well. So I know, and I interview numerous women who are perimenopausal, whose bodies are changing, who are like, look, I'm willing to sit down and talk to my doctor or my nurse about the weight gain and about the mood swings and about the hot flashes, but I won't say, I want my sex life back. And that's a problem. And that's on both sides. That's because many of us have faced judgment from healthcare providers, and because we feel that after a certain age, sex shouldn't be important. And that's not what we see at all. We see there are studies of people in their 60s and 70s having great and fulfilling sexual relationships. Yes, there are physical limitations. Nobody's reverse cowgirling anymore, as I always say, but they're still having and they're leading really good lives because of it. So there is like we talked about in the beginning, there are all these institutions that have this innate inherent shame that we need to step up and be like, that's not going to be the way this phase of my life goes. By the way, andropause is real. And that's menopause, right? It's a drop in testosterone for men. So when men suddenly feel that their muscle density is dropping after a certain age, they're losing hair, their libido is on the decline, that's what's happening. You know how many men don't even know what andropause is?
Yeah, that makes so much sense that they're also going to have changes and need to be aware of that. And I think, especially for long term couples that have been together for a long time, I think you just fall into this pattern where you forget that it's all about communication and problem solving. So we talk about the babies. I think the babies are definitely one thing, and you get really a lot of sleep deprivation. But you know what nobody talks about is when you have teenagers in the house that don't want to go to bed at night. That is
Oh,
another challenge. Oh my
yeah,
God, go
yeah,
to bed.
yeah.
So there's so many things that can interfere with intimacy
Yeah,
that you have to get creative and problem solve around.
yeah.
Like, okay, maybe we're not having sex as much as we'd like or one partner likes. How can we get creative about this? What are some other ways we can be together, have this connection, have intimacy?
Mm.
And it requires vulnerability, and it requires being honest about things.
I mean, one of the first things we have to do is acknowledge that we live in a world that does not prioritize connection and intimacy. Right? Listen, I'm as type A as they come. I'm Indian. I have multiple graduate degrees. I can keep going till the cows come home, right? I can be studying at night and becoming smarter and more accomplished and all of that stuff because that's what society has taught me is valued. So you got to break away from that first and be like, you know what? And I go after the sports all the time because it's such a pet peeve for me. Why are we spending our like 2 precious days of break sitting on the soccer field or sitting on the baseball field and just when do we rest? When do we rest? When do we come home and cuddle and make time and space for a beautiful dinner? So another part of that question is, or that answer is, you have to build that ethos outside of the bedroom. You have to build it all day long. And that's where the sexting and the flirting and the intimacy and cooking something together or listening to music or holding hands and going for a walk. Intimacy is not about, just missionary at night for like 20 minutes. And by the way, to your point about the kids, I think it is time that children acknowledge that their parents have sex. This whole meme that we've made of it, oh my God, I walked in on my parents having sex and it was the most atrocious thing. Why? It's perfectly natural. It's how you came about in the world. And it's all ways to dispel this idea that, sex is bad and, moms shouldn't be sexual. That's another one, right? We have no models of healthy sexual mothers. They're either bad moms or they're MILFs and cougars and they're over sexualized or they've got the apron and they're completely asexual. We don't have anything in between. But I'll tell you something, growing up, my parents, Sunday mornings, their room door would remain locked till 10 in the morning. And my sister and I would do what we needed to do. We'd be playing Barbie, Legos, whatever. 10 o'clock, we'd hear the door unlock and we'd pile into their bedroom and we'd listen to music and whatever. The day had begun. The family part of the day had begun. But that time for them, now in retrospect, I mean, talk about signaling to the whole world, including to your partner, that one-on-one time is important.
Yeah. And really having protected time, that
Sure.
sacred space for you and your partner. But I love how you're talking about you need to build that, throughout the day, throughout the week. It can't just be like this one thing. And I think that's so important for all of us because I, like you, I'm training for 3 half Ironmans right now. So that
I
was
get it. I
my
get it.
husband's complaint is like, you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and you want to go to bed at 8 o'clock at night. So it's like when?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Because we
it's
are
true, we
told.
have like these goals
Yeah.
and it interferes with things sometimes.
Yeah, and because it's not a productive use of time in a sense, right? But if you consider the implications for your life, I mean, it's World Health Day. I'm doing a bunch of talks for it on my Instagram. It was on Sunday. There are tremendous health benefits here. And why isn't your health, mental and physical, why isn't that a goal? Why isn't that good enough?
Yeah. So important to think about those things. What can we do to create deeper connections and greater fulfillment with our romantic partners?
Well, I would ask yourself, what's standing in your way? Are you hiding behind work? Are you hiding behind the porn addiction? Are you hiding behind the substance abuse? Are you hiding behind the grief? A lot of my friends are losing their parents now. So, what is standing in your way? And again, if you acknowledge that the quality of your relationships, your sexual well being is one of the biggest factors in terms of leading a fulfilled life, a well and fulfilled life, how can it not be something that you put some real conscious effort towards? A lot of people are hesitant to get help, particularly around this stuff. And I understand it. I mean, what's the difference between a therapist and a sex therapist? Maybe my therapist will judge me. I've had that. As a very sexual woman, I've had therapists who don't quite get it and be like, well, find the right people, find the right professionals, find the right community of people that will support you in getting to where you want to go. But this is an inside job and nobody's going to do it for you.
Well, Kamna, this has been a fantastic conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot, opened up some thought processes, some things that I'm going to contemplate over the week. And I want to ask you some things about yourself. So,
Sure.
what do you wish more people knew? And this could be about anything. What do you wish more people knew?
Oh, I wish people knew that feeling good is allowed. You're allowed to feel good in life. Where I feel like we beat ourselves up about that all the time.
It's something that we have a right to, actually. Yeah, let's feel good. How do you define success in this lifetime?
I think really loving yourself, all aspects of yourself, whatever's in the shadows, knowing it and loving it. And
Yeah.
I have to say, loving it doesn't mean like I feel like, oh, if I put this on social media, it means I've acknowledged it. It's none of that. It's none of that. It's really an internal process. It's your own right, but it's something that will show at the end of your life if you've achieved.
I love that. Is there a goal or dream that has evaded you or something that you have left on your bucket list that you'd be willing to share with us?
Oh, I'm on a lifelong journey to chip away at something that is centuries old. So my goal is to just do the best I can, and if I've changed one person's life, that's good. But I know that this is a lifelong journey.
You seem like you're a very purpose driven, mission driven person.
I came, like I said, I came to this late, but Kaamna means desire in Sanskrit. So what the hell else was I going to do?
I love it. It was meant to be.
Seems like it.
What does it mean to be human?
To be deeply sentient, sensual, being able to have the privilege of using your senses, including the sixth one, to experience this beautiful world of ours and to be flawed and to work through all of that.
I know what a privilege it is that we get to feel everything, even though sometimes it's painful and difficult, but it's not necessarily something that we'll have for our entire existence. But in this human form, we get to. So very interesting. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. I appreciate it so much. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. It's very valuable and meaningful. I know you're helping a lot of people. So if you can please tell my listeners where they can connect with you and what products and services you offer.
Sure. So you can find me on Kaamna Live, KAAMNALIVE, on Instagram, on YouTube, on Threads, on LinkedIn, and at kaamnalive.com. I have a coaching practice where I will work with people one-on-one. I'm also still running my research. So as I mentioned, I interview people from around the world. Believe it or not, this data set doesn't exist. So I'm able to compare people really across different countries. So if you're interested in sharing your story with me, you can sign up on Kaamna Live for that as well. And I loved being here. Thank you, Dr. Yami.
So fabulous. Thank you so much. And it was such a pleasure getting to meet you and learning from you today.
You too. Thank you. I am Kaamna and I am human.
Thank you for listening to another episode of I Am Human. I would be so honored if you subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. We love our listeners and take your feedback seriously. If you have questions or constructive feedback, you can email us at podcast@dryami.com. That's podcast@doctoryami.com. I am your host, Dr. Yami Cazorla-Lancaster. I Am Human is produced by myself and Alejandra Parra. Graphics designed by Alejandra Parra. Music by Angela Soph with Glowbox Productions and edited by the Castos production team. Remember, human, you are here for a reason. Have fun, explore, and live your life to the fullest.